Hello, and welcome to Season 10, Episode 5 of the Cartridge Club's Game of the Month podcast, where we bring together members of the Cartridge Club community to discuss our community playthrough. If you're new to the club or are interested in participating in future months, please join our community Discord, our forums at cartridgeclub.org, or follow us on Twitter at CartridgeClubNA. We'd love to see the hashtag Cartridge Club used whenever you talk about one of the games we've selected. I'm Eric, the mighty QDawg, here with Melissa, Mrs. QDawg.
Hello.
And on behalf of our rotating pool of hosts, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Additionally, on behalf of the entire Cartridge Club community, I'd like to give special thanks to our Patreon Club backers. It's January, and once again we're playing a classic Sega Master System game that even NES fans are envious of, Phantasy Star. Joining us to talk about the game is Jeremy. Jeremy, why don't you tell us a little bit about your history with gaming and your experience with Phantasy Star?
All right. Yeah, so, I had the pleasure of growing up with a Sega Master System. And Phantasy Star, while it wasn't, the first game or first RPG that I played, it was the one that, really got me into video games. It was the first game that I played that seemed like a really well-rounded experience, between stories and progressions, graphics, sound. I feel like it was the first game that really had that full package, and kind of going back and playing it as an adult, you can kind of see, where maybe the story isn't as fleshed out in the game, but that's why you have to supplement it with the instruction manual, and that, having that instruction manual there as a companion to the game was really helpful and fun thing to have. Actually, when I was in fourth grade, I created a tabletop game based on Phantasy Star, and it was overly complicated, and I could never get it to work properly, but it was a lot of fun to put together, at least.
Wow, that's fun.
So for versions that I played Sega Master System, obviously first. I played the versions that are on the Sonic Ultimate Gaming Collections, and then the Sega Ages Switch version. And that's the version I played this time, and it's the version I usually play when I go through another playthrough of the game.
Okay, and we also have Cody. Cody, why don't you tell us about your history with the game?
My history with the game, growing up, being a, living the time of the Sega Master System, my mom wanted to get it, and me and my brother always interjected our own input into the games we would get if they weren't a gift, and we were against it. We wanted other stuff. We got Govelius, we got Wonder Boy. We had just picked other games. We thought that looked too complicated. So as time went on, and I eventually collected my own Sega Master System and my own games. It was probably about 2001 is actually the first time that I actually ever played it. And I played it, I just bought a straight card off at eBay. I wasn't thinking on the aspect of, let's get a CIB, like I do now, because it has the instructions and all the extra art. So I just had that blank cartridge, popped it into the system, played it on a newer flat screen CRT in the bedroom, and it was like a 19-inch, and I did it with headphones on so I could take it all in, and it was kind of like a changing moment, to the Phantasy Star series, because prior to that I had only played Phantasy Star 2, briefly with 3. I wasn't into it at the time, and then 4. So that was my introduction into Phantasy Star, the original game. And I played through it, really enjoyed all the aspects of it. The dungeon crawling, really pulled me into Shining in the Darkness thoughts. I really like Shining in the Darkness. That's probably one of my favorite games.
Oh, yeah.
And for this month, I played the Japanese version because I'd played the US version. It was probably, 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago. And I think I might have played it once more in between to refresh my memory on the history of it, because I eventually played through Phantasy Star 3 did 4 again, and then I got into the online Phantasy Stars. And, there's definitely some cues that come from the original in the future episodes of Phantasy Star.
Okay, now I think these two guests have played the game in the past before. But I think our next guest, this might be his first playthrough. And our guest is James. James, why don't you tell us about your history with the game Phantasy Star?
Well, 0. Literally 0. That's why I think you actually asked me to join, is because you wanted a perspective from someone that had literally never dabbled with it at all. And this is also being the perspective of someone that doesn't, how do I say it? I enjoy RPGs, but they aren't my thing. Besides, I've enjoyed some of the earlier Final Fantasies. Obviously, Final Fantasy VII is one that kind of actually really made me start to love the whole genre. But it typically would go like I played Mario RPG. I would call that a very beginner's one by any means. Like, it's very beginner for an RPG. But I enjoyed that as well. Yeah, like I said, I'm not huge into the genre, but I see the appeal. Like, I mean, there's definitely some ones that I've played in the past, like the Lunar series on Sega CD. Being a massive Sega CD fan, I definitely enjoyed a lot of the Sega consoles that were out. I think I was a little bit too young for the Master System, but everything past that, I owned them all pretty much as they came out, to the best of my knowledge. But in terms of gaming, RPGs are something that has been a mild interest, to say the least. So hopefully I put a little bit of perspective on what I felt with this game, having never touched it before, and the rest of the crew here being, essentially what I kind of gather as diehard fans.
Yeah. Yes, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing your take on a 35-year-old game played in 2023.
Yeah. What did you play it on this time?
I tried it first, this Master System version, and I can explain later my reasoning for moving on to the Switch. Okay. I'm sure everyone here probably knows why, though.
Yeah.
Okay, and Melissa, I almost forgot about you. Go ahead. What's your experience?
So I didn't play RPGs when I was younger, and then you and I got married, and I was looking for some games to play while because I had moved out of state with you, and so I was looking for some games to play to pass the time. And then you suggested that I try this RPG, one of your favorite series of RPGs, and that you said you would help me. And so I said, all right, let's do it. So I played Phantasy Star back in 2001 also, or was it, maybe it was early 2002? I can't remember.
Either way, yeah.
So you helped me play it, and I remember really digging it. I mean, I got a little notebook out. I took little notes to remember different things and stuff, because I felt like there was so much information coming at me in terms of weapons and armor and where you had to go and what you had to use and whatnot. So I really enjoyed it. And so this time around, I said, I'm going to play it again. And this time I played it on the Switch. Yeah. Because there are some, advantages to doing so.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, we'll talk about the different versions of them as we go. And I even played a third version.
That's correct.
This time.
Yes.
Which I'll mention briefly here. We're not really going to talk about this version. I played the Sega Ages remake for the PlayStation 2, which was a Japan exclusive. But there has been an English translation patch, a fan translation. And so I played that. And that added some very interesting things. But I really want to focus sort of the discussion on the Master System version.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, what I'd like to do is just give a little bit of background. I'm only going to give a little bit of background on the game, and then we're going to segue right into sort of the story. So we are going to have some spoilers here. But the game was originally released in Japan on December 20th of 1987, and it came to the U.S. in November of 1988. Which makes it, it's actually one of the first console RPGs in the United States. I think Dragon Warrior predates it, but it came to the U.S. before Final Fantasy even. Though in Japan, I think they were contemporaries. But it makes it one of the earliest U.S. release Japanese RPGs, and it came to the Sega Master System. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's one of the few games that, if anybody had heard about it, the Master System back in the day, this is one of the games they would have known about it. It had a pretty big impact. And I think part of that is the story.
Mm-hmm.
It had some unique characteristics. So I'm actually going to ask Jeremy if he can introduce the story to us. What kind of sets off the game Phantasy Star story-wise?
Yeah, sure. So, the setting of Phantasy Star is in this 3-planet solar system called the Algol system. There's kind of like a planet of green, Palma, desert planet, Montavia, an ice planet, Deserus. And, so presiding over all of these is a king who used to be somewhat benevolent and then turned evil, named Lassic. And, there's sort of this resistance against his regime. And that's where you sort of insert yourself is when one of these resistance fighters named Nero goes up against Lassic's men and dies. His sister Alice takes up his sword and kind of takes up his mission to take on Lassic and free the Algol system.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. So that's how the game starts off. But one of the first things that we have to do in the game is gather up our group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cody, can you tell us about the party in the game, gathering up your compatriots for this quest?
Okay, so the first inkling that you're going to be getting your party is you run into Tylon, which I played the Mark III version that was translated to English. The name of the character is Tylon, which I believe is in the US version. It's not Rudo, but it's like Rudo from Phantasy Star 2. What's his name?
Odin?
Odin, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So Odin, his name's Tylon in the Japanese version.
Ah.
And you run into him, he's frozen, is stone. He's turned into stone. So that leads you on the next path, going on, and you can't do anything with him. And you don't really know that you're supposed to at that point until you acquire the cat, and his name's Meow, or however you pronounce it.
We always pronounce it Meow.
Yeah.
Yeah, Meow.
Same.
And Meow is, to me, I think, an iconic character. If you follow the series, you'll get it. I don't want to spoil it. So whenever I've played Phantasy Star, that's the first one that comes to mind. It's a unique character, and as you move on, the next character is pretty iconic too. And I don't want to spoil that either. So I don't know. It's an interesting process to get your characters. You got to do a lot of fetch. You got to do a lot of grinding in between the fetch, and then when you get them, you obviously get the rewards to your party. But I think about it a little deeper. I think about the story backgrounds that I know about the series. So.
Okay, so yeah, thank you, Cody. So you mentioned that it takes a little bit of a grind to maybe get the party members. Let's talk a little bit about the gameplay. James, why don't you lead us in? What was the first hour of the game like for you? What did that entail? Was it difficult?
For me, it was exploring the first town that you basically spawn in.
Mm-hmm.
And then outside of that town, it's basically just pure green, almost grass, and then there's a bit of a wooded area outside of, I guess you'd call, the town walls. Yeah, it's basically a lot of heavy grinding because, as expected, you end up starting pretty bare bones, like with virtually nothing.
Yeah.
And we can discuss the differences between the two versions later. I don't want to sway away from the itinerary plan here, but yeah, you start out bare bones. It's your, I guess how you call it, typical RPG style with your menus and your equipping systems, that kind of thing. And then everyone has their individual weapons that are only geared for them, and some you can use with multiple characters if you decide to go that route. Like, let's say you buy a weapon that's stupidly expensive and you upgrade for that one character, you can take that other weapon and put it on someone else, assuming that they're allowed to use it by the game design mechanics. Yeah, if you've played an RPG before, I would say that this is pretty cookie cutter in terms of the way it functions. But where this game really shines, in my opinion, is, which we'll eventually get into, I imagine, is the actual quote-unquote dungeon crawling, because that's where it's significantly different than anything that I've honestly ever seen before. Coming from anything else where it's more of a top-down sort of 2D view kind of deal, the dungeons was both intriguing and at the same time the reason why I switched from, no pun intended, from the Master System version to playing the Sega Ages version, because without having a map system, it can be game breaking, I imagine, for some people that aren't really prepared to take on that level of direction, having virtually no way of knowing where you are in terms of, I guess we'll call it sort of the old school Windows screensaver. You sort of like bounce around and look 4 different ways with the walls on the side. It's very reminiscent of that. Only you direct yourself where you go, and where the screensaver, where I'm going back, multiple years of Windows, but I'm sure some people will probably remember.
I remember.
I would say that for someone that's never played it, that's probably the easiest way to depict how those dungeons look, only on a Sega Master System graphic style.
Yeah, they were first-person view, right?
Yep.
And they were just like the Windows or like Wolfenstein 3D or something, right? And that was unique for the Master System. Okay, so what about the rest of you? What did you think? Those dungeons were the big deal. What about the rest of you?
I was thinking like Might and Magic. If you're coming onto the Master System version and it's your first time playing, the first couple hours can just be really brutal. I remember as a kid, anytime I started a playthrough, just like walking back and forth and back and forth and back and forth in front of the gates of Caminite there. Fight a couple battles, run back in, heal with Suelo, run back out, back and forth, back and forth. So I don't do that anymore. I only play the Sega Ages version now, because that part of the game turns into about 15 minutes.
That's what I did too. And I remember when I first got Meow, and I went out and like he died like right away. And I was like, oh, I guess I gotta like walk around a little bit more and build them up. And in the Sega Ages one, I think they get built. They get stronger faster than in the Master System version.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And talking about the dungeons and mapping it and everything, if you played this when it was first released, it's probably common for you to like grab some graph paper, use that to map out the dungeons. And in fact, when I first met Eric and Melissa, and we talked about this game, bringing up that graph paper is almost like a secret handshake with people who played Phantasy Star. Back then, it's like, you got the graph paper? You save your maps? Yeah, you did.
For sure.
Yeah, and it's actually unique to Phantasy Star 1 that they did the first-person dungeons, which was a disappointment to me. But when I heard about the Genesis versions, that they didn't carry that forward, because it was such a unique point in the game, a selling point or aspect of the game, the first person, especially on an 8-bit system. It was really remarkable to see. Back in the day. But while you're in the dungeons, you're not alone.
Nope.
Let's talk about the battles. And there's a couple of unique things about the battle. Who wants to jump in? Tell us about the battle system.
Yeah, so the battles, anytime you switch to battle, changes to that first-person perspective that, like, you get in the dungeon. And depending on where you're at, Palma, I think, has like 4 different backdrops that you can have, and Montavia and Deseros just have the one for each of them. But on Palma, depending on what kind of terrain you're on, you can have different backdrops. And then with each battle, you have a single enemy you're looking at, similar to what Dragon Warrior had, except that these enemies can almost be stacked. I guess is the best way to describe it. So, you might have one enemy in front of you, and then 5 or 6 different hit point bars on the side of the screen. And that was their way of like showing that you're fighting multiple enemies. And there's no way you can select which enemy you want to attack. Enemies with a single hit point hit just as hard as enemies with full HP.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like kind of annoying too, because it was like, and they wouldn't, if you had your whole party, let's say we were at your whole party, all 4 of them, they wouldn't all hit like the first one and just get rid of that guy. They'd all hit random ones, so like the fight would take longer because you're like, just do one guy and get rid of him.
Yeah. Inevitably, you'll just be like taking away chunks of hit points against all 6 of them simultaneously. And they're all just kind of, hitting you back the whole time. That's what makes the guns so great in the game. Something I want to talk about later, because Bean and I were talking, and he was surprised that I didn't beat a boss in the game in all the playthroughs that I had done on the Sega Ages version. But we could talk about that later.
Okay, let me talk briefly. You mentioned the backdrops. That was another really, I thought, a really nice selling point, something they regressed when they went to Phantasy Star 2, for example, which didn't have any backdrop, just a blue grid. Well, 2, 3, both, both of them.
We should talk about too, like there's different planets, right, that you fight on.
As you're
playing through. So you've got Palma. I mean, you've got Palma, which is like
that's where you start.
Yeah, green planet, and then you have Motavia. And that is the desert planet, and then Dezoris is the ice planet. And so you have 3 planets that you basically fight on at different times. And so each time you'd have a battle, the background would change depending on what planet you're on. You know? So that was kind of neat.
That was kind of cool, yeah.
And too, like on Palma, there's areas where there's water, and so if you're fighting a water monster, you'd see water in the background instead of the trees or whatever.
So let me push on that a little bit. You mentioned we're in 3 different planets, but this is an RPG. Isn't there supposed to be magic and swords? James, what's going on with this RPG? What's the deal, man? There's space travel and there's magic. What'd you think of that?
It's quite different, but like I said, you don't purchase your spells or anything. You get them with your experience. And what I found with that was it made an incentive to grind once you knew that that's how it happened, which was kind of cool, because I'm used to, again, limited RPG player, getting, say, something like materia or whatnot. This was just pure level grinding. And that's what got a lot of your abilities, and including, not even just straight up magic, but it could be for helping the party through different scenarios. It was different, but at the same time, once you get used to it, it's actually it's forgiving once you get used to it, how everything sort of comes together. But I will say, actually, I guess Cody, he might have a better idea. Hopefully I'm not going off at a tangent too much, but I don't know if we'll come back to it. With your translation that you did from the Japanese to the English, I'm curious. I just gotta ask. I know that you talked about the different characters having different names. How about the translation for the enemies? Because I found some of the enemy names either made perfect sense, like a scorpion, you're battling a scorpion, or then you can get something called an owl bear, which is nothing like an owl or a bear. It's literally an eyeball with wings.
Yeah, I think that overall, I think they were the same. I was trying to do some comparisons from what I remembered. Owlbear was in there, obviously the different colored variants. As far as I can tell, I think they were the same, but I had read in the past, and I think somebody had said that there was a couple different variant names, and I'm not sure which ones those would be for sure. I might be wrong, but I thought I'd read that somewhere that the Japanese version had different naming for a few of the enemies. Like it was a
Okay.
whole different variant.
And I was just curious if like the Japanese version was again like winged eyeball, and then somehow that translation just got completely butchered when it came over here. I was just literally had to bring it up because as I was going through the game, like wow, some of these enemy names are really out there.
Well, I wonder too if that was maybe like a lost in translation, because I know
That's what I
like
mean.
some of the like when you in some of the towns there's shops, right, where you can buy armor, and there's a secondhand shop, and then there's a first food shop which
Yeah.
which sold burgers and cola. But I wonder if that was supposed to be like a fast food shop.
Oh, it certainly was.
And
yeah.
then like the owl bear might have been like an owl bat because it had like big eyes like an owl, but then it had wings like a bat. I don't know. I mean, there's you can speculate whatever.
Yeah,
I could see that.
Yeah.
James is absolutely right. Owl bear makes no
Yeah.
sense. It's a flying eye with wings.
Yes.
Not an owl, not a bear. But actually, I want to, if I can, just for the record, I want to mention sort of the translation aspects of it and what I want to kind of focus on, at least for this podcast, is we're going to be talking about the English translation of the Master System version. And so I want to mention the character names also, because one thing that's confusing about the character names is they do come back in other episodes and later games on the Genesis in the US, and they have different names. They're supposed to represent the same characters. In the game that we're talking about on the Master System, our main character is named Alice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a woman,
Mm-hmm.
which was unique at the time. I don't know that we necessarily need to talk about that, but having a female protagonist, that was a little unusual.
Yeah.
Her name is Alice. We mentioned Meow, who looks like a little cat named Meow.
Mm-hmm.
And then Cody mentioned Odin, who
Mm-hmm.
goes by other names, but in the Master System version, he's called Odin. And the last character, who I don't think we've named yet,
Mm-hmm.
is Noah,
Right.
who is a wizard, or they call an Esper. And I remember showing this game to a buddy of mine in the late 90s, and he said, "Oh, Esper, they took that from Final Fantasy VI."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, no, they didn't, because this game predates Final Fantasy VI by like 6 years or something. So that character, did I mention the name, is Noah,
Yeah.
and sometimes goes by Lutz.
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely, yeah. Jeremy, were you going to say, or Cody, were you going to say something?
The characters in the Mark III, which would be probably the definitive original cut, you know what I'm saying, is the way to think of it. Alice is, the protagonist in there still. Meow is still in there. And then you got Tylon, in which I don't think that has any tie to the future. But the name of Noah is Lutz
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
in the Japanese version.
Yeah. So they're definitely, Phantasy Star does suffer from some inconsistent translating. And depending on how much of a purist you are, you might go for one thing or another. But for the purposes of this podcast, we're going to use, I think, the US Master System names. And I think those are the same names that were used in the Switch version,
Yes.
which I think is the most popular version between at least this group of people to play. Okay, so we talked a little bit about how there's magic,
Mm-hmm.
right? We talked a little bit about the battles, I guess. Do we want to talk? What do we want to talk about?
Well, there's also like what I thought was interesting was like you got space travel, right? So
Mhm.
you're traveling, you get a spaceship eventually, and then you travel by space, and then each of the planets also has like their own other vehicle that you use on the planets, right? So eventually you get a Land Rover,
Mhm.
which you can use on Motavia because they have these eyes like
Antlions.
Oh, antlion. To me, they look like a big eye again, so I don't know why it's called the antlion. But so
I think it's supposed to be like a mound with a creature.
Oh, okay.
That's how I always
Yeah.
interpreted it, like
So-
a Sarlacc
Right.
from Star Wars. Anyway, go ahead.
So yeah, so then you can traverse there without hitting these ant lions. And then when you're back on Palma, you get a
Hovercraft.
So you can traverse the water because there's a lot of water. And which I didn't find out till later, which was good because I didn't know what I was gonna do. There's like lava. I don't know if you get. I'm sure you guys did. But there's lava, and you can use the hovercraft to go over the lava and not get hurt. Because one time I died in the lava. This was before I had the hovercraft. And then there's an icebreaker, ice digger that you can use on Dosaurus to get through some of the mountains of ice
That's
and
actually
find secret areas.
that part's required.
That is required, yes.
So yeah, so we have some vehicles. We're talking about spaceships. You're
Mhm.
traveling back and forth between these planets.
Mhm.
We have the other vehicles.
Yep.
Which become staples in all the games. So each of the games has vehicles and space travel. I'm trying to think of three. Three does, yeah. Vehicles and space travel.
Yeah.
All established in the first game. Real quick, I wanted to talk about the Star Wars link. So, people talk quite a bit about Phantasy Star and in comparison with Star Wars. You have like the lightsabers, the hydrofoil, or the hovercraft or whatever looks like Luke's land speeder. Motavians look like
Jawas.
Jawas. There you go.
Yep.
But for the story itself, I've always gone with a different approach. So there's this movie that came out in 1983 that featured characters with swords, like medieval type weapons, going up against people with lasers. I believe there were spaceships in it. I think that's where these people, where the enemies come from. I think they're aliens. So they arrived to their planet by spaceship. I can't recall perfectly, but do you know what movie I'm talking about?
I don't think so.
So the movie's called Krull.
Oh, I know. I've heard of the movie.
I've heard of that movie, but
I've never seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you watch that movie and think about the story of Phantasy Star up to the kind of like ending battle in that movie, I think you'll find some like good comparisons between the two, especially with the story, because the story is different, of course, than Star Wars, but I feel like the story of Krull and Phantasy Star has a lot of overlap, and the setting.
Is that right?
Oh.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's my little spiel on the whole Phantasy Star and Star Wars comparisons.
So yeah, those comparisons have been made, but you're saying it really should be to Krull. So anybody who's a fan of Phantasy Star, should we go see this movie, Krull?
I think so.
Yeah.
Cody
All
agrees.
right. All
Cody
right.
agrees. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about the Star Wars thing. So you mentioned, I do want to mention one more thing. So you mentioned the Motavians, they look like Jawas. And we did talk about there being 3 different planets. And it turns out that these 3 planets have 3 different kinds of indigenous species, intelligent species, right? The Palmans are more like humans, right? The Motavians look a little bit like Jawas, you said, Jeremy, right? And then on Dosaurus, the ice planet, they have Dosorians, which they look like tall, green, I don't know, almost lizard-like, I would say. They have green skin. They're also liars, apparently. They like to lie a lot. But what's interesting about this, the reason I'm actually bringing it up is because we have this space travel, we have these planets and these creatures. During battles, you have the option of not always just fighting with things. If you think it's an intelligent creature, you have the option of trying to talk to it, right?
Yeah.
Did anybody try talking to the different creatures to see what would happen?
Yeah, I did. I almost did it out of like the fact that you could communicate with them, and then it was like at that point I don't feel like I should attack them.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
It turns out that did you find any, Cody, that you thought were like particularly interesting that you talked to? Any surprises that you wouldn't have thought?
I think the oh man, I talked to the Jawas, the 2 types of Jawa people, and they're not Jawas, but there's those 2 on Motavia, and then you can talk to them on Desirous as well. I don't know if I tried talking to much other than that. I think that I thought I'd read something like I tried talking to Spider, something like you could communicate with Spider, but it didn't work on the one I was fighting, I guess.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, go ahead,
I
Melissa.
was gonna say, so that you had the talk option,
There were a couple of, there was a
Yeah.
chat, there was a talk, and then there were some spells.
and then there were spells. So like sometimes if the talk didn't work, then another time I would use the magic, and then that I was able to talk to spiders, but you had to use the magic to do that. And I was also able to talk to dragons.
Yeah.
Did you guys talk to any
Hmm.
dragons?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think I had to use Noah's magic though to talk to dragon because his talk magic was more powerful.
Yeah.
So and then you don't have to fight him.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a surprise. You can actually talk to
Mhm.
some of the characters, creatures, and then you don't have to fight them.
Yeah.
They'll give you a hint, and then you
Mhm.
can move on. And the dragons were the one that surprised me because they're kind of like bosses,
Yeah.
but you can talk to them,
Mhm.
and they'll tell you something, and then you'll have to reapproach them again anyway and attack them in certain cases. But,
Yeah.
Jeremy, anything about the talking or the creatures or surprises that you want to mention?
It's something I did a lot when I was younger, for the novelty aspect of it. But pretty much in subsequent playthroughs, it's like crushing everything in sight. So I don't, I don't really bother with that. Like I don't even see that on my menu.
You just battle everybody?
Yeah.
What about you, James? Did you talk to anybody?
Oh, if you want to go about into the surprises, imagine my surprise when I had barely gotten my feet wet with this game for a couple of hours. And oh, would you like to grab the treasure chest? Sure, I do. And then it explodes in my face and it kills me.
That's right.
Oh.
Tell us. Yeah, tell us.
Oh,
There's a
yeah.
freaking surprise. It was it explodes in your face, or you can get like an arrow to the face or something.
So
And that
after
one
every
time,
battle,
I
right? After
grind
every
and I
battle, a
didn't
treasure
save,
drops.
and it killed me. And I don't know if I was more PO'd about it or just disbelief what had just happened to me because it was so early in the game that I got screwed.
Mhm. Yep.
I forgot about that. Yeah, that's right.
And I will say, I mean, I don't know, some people might count this as cheating, but on the Sega Ages, you could save whenever, and it would be easy to just like restart the game. So a lot of times I would, if I was in a dungeon for a long time, or I had a battle, I would save it, then I would open the chest, and if it exploded, because that would take off a ton of health, I just restart.
Yeah.
I just would like start from my save again.
So James mentioned, there's an arrow, which I think only damages one character.
I think so.
And then there's an explosion,
Mhm.
which hurts you all
Yeah.
and does quite a bit of damage.
Yeah.
So, and this is after every battle. You have the option of taking the treasure chest
Mhm.
and opening it or walking away if you're worried about it exploding.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. So yeah, they can punish you even after death.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, so you mentioned the treasure chest kind of killed you. So let's talk a little bit about the difficulty of the game. We talked about sort of maybe the beginning of the game is kind of a slog where you have to grind and go back and forth real quickly. But what do you guys think of the overall difficulty of the game as we progressed into the dungeons that got harder, multi-level? There was something they did in the dungeons towards the end which was really annoying. Jeremy, what can you tell us about the difficulty of this game in all your playthroughs?
Yeah, so as a 7-year-old, impossible.
Yeah.
I coming out of that starting area, trying to figure out what to do, couldn't do it at that age. And actually, my dad and I played this together, and there used to be this great system or hotline that Sega had that was 1-800-USA-SEGA. And it was a free service, and you could call up and you can kind of tell them where you're stuck at in games, and they would tell you what to do next. So any of the puzzles in this, like how to get the road pass, from the secrets, where Hapsby or whatever was located, that was all. Yeah, that was all knowledge I gained from that hotline because it just wasn't happening for me.
Yeah.
Today, obviously, like I play this game, it's like the back of my hand. Like, I walk through the order of steps like nothing. It's like it'd be like someone like speed running Super Mario Brothers or something like that, which is something I can't do, but I can play the heck out of Phantasy Star.
Good. Cody, what about you? What about the difficulty for you?
I feel like in the amount of time it had been that has actually passed since I pre-played it before, this round it really reminded me how grindy it is and how different it feels from like a current day RPG. Classic RPGs, growing up playing them, you were in for the grind and you knew it, and that was just part of the acceptance. Nowadays, you play an RPG, it feels like you're getting rewarded a lot faster. And I can tell you that it was a long time. I was doing the gate walking, slowly walking over to Sion, whatever that next town was.
Yeah.
Slowly working my way out there, and actually going into that optional dungeon on X, or that dungeon basically is optional. You don't have to get the item that's in there, but it. I worked my way out that way to get experience, and it was a tough grind, to get going. And I'm the type of guy who would like to give myself a little bit of a lead, so I was working to about a level 10 and 12 before I decided to move forward, and I would take periodic steps like that. And the experience, as it goes on, that gap just gets wider and wider. And I made it to a level 29 on all my characters on the playthrough. I don't even know what a max is. And I felt like, I'm like, man, I should be one-hitting some of this stuff, thinking you should be, and you're not. And you're looking at like an 8,000 point experience to get to the next level, and you're only getting 54 to 100, depending on what it is. So it's definitely a grind. I can't imagine going any higher than that. You'd have to just been bored out of your mind, wasting time grinding the heck out so you could just one hit the end game if that's possible. I don't know if there's a max level.
I don't know.
Yeah,
If there is, I've never hit it.
30 is the max level. I haven't hit that. I haven't hit that since I was a kid. Like you said, bored and just playing over and over. Because the amount of experience you have to gain, like starting at 25 through 30, is like 3 times what you had to gain from 1 through 25. Like it's
Really?
a ton. Yeah, and you don't ever one hit any of the enemies. The damage you do is so random, and that kind of like brings us back to something I wanted to bring up before, was that Dean and I were talking as I was trying to fill out my monster compendium. I had missed something, and he was like, how could you have missed that one? It was Medusa. So I don't go and fight Medusa anymore. I don't bother with the Laconian axe because the damage being so random, it's useless. For me, it's a lot better to have the laser gun. Even if you're fighting one enemy, 20 guaranteed damage, I think, is a lot better than whatever random stuff can happen. Like you could get like 1 through 5 easily. I've seen that happen with the Laconian axe on later enemies. So laser gun all the way. As soon as you get the Levino and you can fly to Dezeris, grab that laser gun, good to go for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
Odin doesn't need anything else.
That's interesting that you said that, because I had wanted that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I did like the laser gun, but then I was like, oh, the Laconian axe is supposed to be better. So I used that, but then I wondered the entire time if I had chosen the right one.
So the gun is, Jeremy, you alluded to this, I'll make it explicit. The gun does a guaranteed 20 damage to every enemy every turn. It's one of Odin's weapons, and it's the best gun that he can get in the game. But yeah, it's a guaranteed 20. And I've wondered about the Laconian axe myself. That's his most powerful, single hit weapon. But that gun, that's pretty good.
Because even at level 30, even at max level, you're not one hitting any of the monsters from Dezeris or in Baya Malay or whatever the name of that last dungeon is. Yeah, you'll just never be that strong enough with the damage formula that this game has. So the constant damage is way better.
Very valuable. Very valuable.
Yeah, I mean, to add on that, I definitely would say once you start the last dungeons of importance, 4 or 5, 4. There, you're not one hitting any of that stuff, and like there is a big variation between you'll be getting slimes that were like early level enemies still popping up in there that are worth high amount of gold. They're just in there to help you get the gold because I mean the difficulty with the monetary system, it was substantial. I mean, just to get the base set of armor off of Palma, it was like 10,000 or something for was it the shields or the armor? Or like 7,000 for the shields and then 10,000 for the diamond armor. And then, the swords that you could acquire. I mean, it was expensive. You were grinding for gold.
You're grinding for gold, you're grinding for experience, yeah. And we'll talk about the Switch version a little later, but they balanced that out a little bit. But before we get there, I wanted to ask James, because minutes ago, Jeremy said something about the road pass. And I think that's one of the first things that trips people up in the game. James, did you get far? How did you deal with this? See, this is like the road pass is like one of the first things in the game that I know really trips people up. How did you do with that part?
You're talking about the accessibility difficulty, as far as I understood, was what people are kind of discussing here. I'm going to say that this doesn't hold your hand very well at all. In fact, I would go as far as to say that it can be mostly cryptic at times. Without honestly having an online guide, I don't think I would have. I probably would have texted you back and been like, "Yeah, I'm out. Find someone else for this."
Yeah.
But I mean, you got to go to a shop and have him throw you out of the shop twice and then ask a third time, like, "What?" Or you got to go and find this cake. This cake is in the worst possible retail location that you could possibly imagine. Because I can tell you right now, ain't no one going to buy a freaking cake in the future. Because I was upset having to find you in the first place. So it's very cryptic as far as this is from a first time playthrough. It's one of those things you guys all know because you've done it before. I went into this, completely absent-minded of what to expect. So, like I said, I think it's a little bit. It hurt me a little bit in terms of accessibility, not being massive into the whole RPG genre. But the ones that I had played definitely cradled you a heck of a lot more and a way earlier than what Phantasy Star does. Now, that's not me criticizing it, saying that it's a bad game. I just think it was released at a time when it made sense to put out a game that way because you got more value for your dollar because you really had to do what you could to figure this stuff out. There was no Google to just pop this stuff up. I don't even know if, to be honest with you, strategy guides were even that much of a thing back in the NES and Super Master System days. Like, I remember, getting strategy guides later on for even, say, some of the Super Nintendo games, but I don't recall seeing them being that prevalent in game stores or even just like your local Toys R Us, or for me out here in Canada, Zellers, that kind of thing. Any retail outlet really carrying those items for games back that early. It was basically here's the game, here's some pretty box art, flip through the manual, and and if you really want to, you can call these hotline numbers. I know Jeremy had mentioned apparently it was free for you, which honestly kind of staggers me because I thought that those were all paid lines. So the fact that you actually had that as a free call, honestly, that blows my mind. I don't remember. It was always a 1-900 number that I remember growing up. And I can say right now, those were never called because my folks were like, "You're not calling a 900 number for a video game."
I kind of remember that 800 number too. I called it, and I thought it was a deal where you didn't actually talk to somebody. You were given options. Yeah, it was a dial pad option, and then they gave you a brief description of certain stuff, or it was just a little bit of a segment. It wasn't even like that deep, and it would change up every now and then.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, my recollection of that is talking to someone on there, like having to like verbally describe where we were at and stuff like that. That's interesting.
Wow.
And talking about that aspect, I wrote into Sega in the Master System and early Genesis era, and me and QDawg were talking about this. You could actually write into Sega and ask for tips, and they would mail it back. And I found that out through the grapevine from a friend. They didn't say that anywhere in their manuals that, hey, write us for tips, you know. And even though Sega, if you look at all their manuals, they have that Forbes Boulevard address on all of it, how to write them directly. And when I found out about that, I started writing them, dude. And like some of them, I'd get a response saying we didn't have anything to send on this, and then some I did. And in talking about that, I found one on eBay recently, and the guy wants $100 for it. Well, it looks like it's a print off, and I was talking to QDawg about it, and he showed me something interesting.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I didn't play Phantasy Star back in the day, and I'll tell you how I got my Phantasy Star hints in a minute. But yeah, I don't know if I knew it or what. I just wrote to them once for help, and they sent me some stuff, and then I wrote a couple more times, and yeah, they would send me printouts, but they sent printouts on letterhead, and
Cool.
all kinds of great tips.
Oh, that's cool.
But I never got Phantasy Star because I never had the game in 1988. I didn't even play it until 96 or 97. But what I did have was GamePro. And I got a lot of hints because a lot of people had asked. They were stuck with the Road Pass or the Lerma nuts or all the things. James is absolutely right. Really cryptic stuff. They had no idea what to do, and in those days they'd either call Sega, they'd write into the magazine, they'd write into Sega, and so whenever I got stuck, I'd flip through my old Game Pros, and sure enough, somebody else got stuck there, and they answered that question. So it was definitely a lot harder back in the day to get some of these answers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But again,
Oh, sorry. So much so that when the second game came out in the U.S., they actually packed it with a strategy guide.
Is that right?
Yeah, so the second Phantasy Star 2 came with its own strategy guide that had maps and like walkthroughs.
Oh yeah,
of the whole game. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember Phantasy Star 2. Yeah, it's funny. And then when I bought Phantasy Star 2 at Funkoland many years later, they would just give you the strategy guide. I just asked them, "Oh, you got any strategy guide here?" They gave it. I've got one for Phantasy Star 2. Did they ever make a strategy guide for Phantasy Star 1 in the U.S.? Does anybody know?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No. But 3 and 4 have them, don't they, Jeremy?
I've seen 3. Have I seen 4? Did I point out 4 to you at PRGE?
I thought you had, but I don't remember.
Yeah, there
Anyway.
might be. I know.
Yeah, they do. I have them all. I have all the guides.
Cool.
The 3 one was actually a write-in mail order.
Oh.
Really?
Like if
So,
your
is there
copy
one
of Phantasy Star 3, there's a flyer in there. It's on purple and white. You know, it's almost like a little letterhead that a church might hand out to you at the door, you know, about the size of the case, and tells you write to this address, pay shipping and handling is like $14, and then they send you the guide, and it's actually a full size, you know, booklet as opposed to like the Phantasy Star 2 one only being about that wide.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the
Yeah,
4 one I gotten from Al's Music and Games. I got it from her at I think I got it at the PRGE, the first one I went to, and that's a full size like Brady Games looking manual.
Nice.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I had Phantasy Star 3 brand new, and I guess I just didn't look very closely at the materials that came with it other than the instruction manual. But
Now you're kicking yourself.
yeah, because I've seen, since then seen that strategy guide, I was like, oh wait, there's a Phantasy Star 3 strategy guide, and now it's like a $60 plus item or something. It's like, oh, I guess I'm never getting that now. I wonder if I could still write them in.
What?
If I could still write them.
I'm sure they've got a bunch of PS3 strategy guides in a box somewhere.
Yeah.
All right. If I can, I think what I'd like to do now is let's cover. We kind of talked about the game. We talked a lot about the game. It's the playing of the game. I wanted to talk a little bit about the technical aspects of the game. We mentioned the dungeons in the first person and the backgrounds. Cody, what do you think of this game technically, graphically, and sound for a game that came out in 1988?
for Master System, it's probably got to be the best graphically. The use of bright color palettes when you're dungeon crawling, good use of darker colors and separations of the pixels on the actual characters that are on screen fighting you is awesome. I really looked deep into that when I was playing it this round. Like, man, they actually did a real good job separating it, even though, the Sega's color pattern, when you look at like other systems of the time, it seems so much darker. And with that, it's so much more vibrant. And the actual outer world interactive areas when you're along a coastline, like I was just staring at that, like, dude, they did an awesome job with the waves coming in on the beach and seeing the waves out in the water, sequencing with it all. And it's just awesome. I mean, all the dungeons had a different color scheme for the most part, especially the key point ones. Just the animation effect when they did their attack, like when you were talking about the Locanon axe not being worth anything, it had a cool little animation that popped up when it hit. It seemed really wide and broad, and you could see it. And I always like seeing the laser gun shots, though, and the sound effect. It had a pretty good sound effect thing going for it too. I mean, Master System, I don't know, man. It's a sad state of things when you look at how technically powerful that game is for the time, that they could have done that with a lot more. But that's going into Sega, territory decisions there. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think the game looks amazing for the time.
I would argue that you've seen people, they say, oh, well, this is the titles that were push the limits of the console. And I would absolutely agree that this probably is I'm familiar with this Master System library, even though I didn't grow up with it. I've played quite a bit of it through emulation. I got a little bit of a collection behind me over there. And
off camera,
I know, it's sad. Actually, no, I lied. No, there it is right there.
There it is.
Hey, there we go.
There's the white spines. I moved things around recently. It's if you were to sit someone down having never known what it was on and they're familiar with the Genesis, I would not fault them thinking that it's a Genesis title, because it honestly looks it doesn't look like it belongs on the Master System. Considering some of the other titles that I've played, it looks remarkable by comparing to anything else that the library has to offer, at least that I have played. And like you guys said before, like, it would be something that the NES owners would be jealous of at the time. And yeah, like, I mean, it honestly looks absolutely killer when you take something like the original Final Fantasy for comparison. It's like night and day how much of a different immersive experience it is compared to just your 2D view where, yeah, everyone's familiar with it. Phantasy Star really was on, like, when they produced that, they thought, let's try and do something different that's really going to knock people's socks off. And I think they really drove it home with that. But I will say that I did prefer the music, the enhanced music. I forget what you guys called it on the Ages version. I preferred that over what the Master System had to offer, but that's just a personal preference between the two that I had played.
Okay. Jeremy, I want to ask you, but tell us a little bit about the sound. Do you know what he's talking about, the two different sound things? Tell us a little bit about what that is, and then give us your impression of the sound and video.
Yeah, definitely. So, when the Master System came to the US, they released it without the FM sound module in it. So, all the music that you hear and sound effects that you hear in the US, for games released in the US, are different than, their Japanese counterparts, as far as I understand it. And so with this new Sega Ages release, they gave you that option to bring back that FM sound, so for people who only played the US Master System version, it's like a totally new thing for them. and it's actually become my preferred way to play the game. You know, although I still have that nostalgia and that love, like I'm hearing the game, the opening theme in my head right now as I'm talking about it, as PSG audio. But I play it with FM sound now, and I think, you know, if the Master System had released with, you know, the FM sound capability, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I don't know too much about the inner workings of the system, but that this game probably would have garnered a better reception here in the States.
Yeah.
Because it you know, like Cody and James mentioned, you know, graphically, you know, you look at that sprite work. Not only is it like vivid, but it's large. You know, that while Dragon Warrior had some good sprite work, it's a lot smaller. You know, and you look at these fully fleshed like monsters. You know, the backdrops of all of the battles and everything. You know, so that aspect of the game, you know, tops what was available on the NES at the time. It's the sound, I think, that you know, had you had that FM sound capability, would have really like elevated it to like a legendary status. You know, for whatever reason, Phantasy Star, I think anyway. I don't know. I don't do a lot on online spaces, but I feel like it's still kind of a niche like game series, you know, especially when it comes to straight up role-playing game, because it stopped being a straight up role-playing game in 1994 when Phantasy Star 4 came out, and it turned into an online you know, kind of it's a multiplayer online game. I haven't really played the online Phantasy Star games, whereas the other ones continued on, so their legacy was able to grow. But when you come back to their origins, you know, people still think of like Dragon Warrior 1, Final Fantasy 1 as being legendary games. And I think Phantasy Star would have that status if the sound capabilities had been there from the start.
Yeah. What about you, Melissa?
I played both. You know, I played the original, and then I played the Sega Aegis Switch one. And I guess maybe it's nostalgia talking, but I think I like the original because you were playing the Master System one again for this go around at first, and so
that has the PSG sound,
right? And then I was playing it on my Switch at the same time, and so I would hear your music and I would hear my music, and I was like, I do kind of think I like your music better.
You like the PSG?
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, you know, just like you said, Jeremy, like you can hear the opening sound. I can hear the Palma, you know, music and walking around in town. And then the dungeon tune is one of my favorites. And that is something that, so Eric will tend to whistle throughout the day, and he will whistle various video game songs. And for the longest time, he always did the dungeon from Phantasy Star. And when we started playing this for this podcast in January, the girls would come down, our children would come down and see us playing it, and then heard the dungeon music, and they said, "Oh, that's where that song comes from," because they even know that their dad will go around whistling the dungeon music and not know where it's from, and now they do. So,
the song's been in my head rent-free for 30 years. Yeah,
that's right. So, you know.
Well, I want to mention quickly, we did a community poll about the sound, about whether people prefer the FM or the PSG, which is the original Master System, US Master System sound chip. We got 11 votes, and it was as close as an odd-numbered thing can get. Of only 11 votes. It was 55% preferred the FM sound in our playthrough. Yeah. So, nostalgia aside, James, he played it for the first time. He likes the FM sound. I think Jeremy is saying he likes the FM sound. I have nostalgia for the PSG.
I know, and so do I. And what about
Cody?
you, Cody?
What do you prefer?
Since I played with the FM sound for the first time, and I prefer it. You know, I mean, the punchy bass sound pattern is really good. You know.
There you go. There you go.
Playing that on a good sound system, you know, it sounds like punchy. A modern game.
Yeah, it's punchy.
Okay. Well, there you have it. So, the best way to play, so Jeremy, you mentioned you can't play Phantasy Star on a US Master System with FM sound. So, if you want to hear FM sound, There's some expensive options, but then there's a really great option. Let's talk about this. We've mentioned it a few times, and that's the Switch Sega Ages version.
Right.
And Melissa, lead us into this. What you've played, tell us about the Sega Ages version.
So the Sega Ages version, they added the FM sound. They added auto mapping for the dungeons. So you can see where you're going. You can see all the surprises in the dungeon that, there are traps in the dungeon, and you can see those ahead of time. If you're not walking too fast, you can see those ahead of time. And also, there's something that you mentioned, Eric, that you didn't know about before, is that there are like hidden spots in some of the dungeons, and you can see that on the auto mapping. You're like, why is that gray over there? And if you go, you can walk through a wall, which I think some of your maps didn't have.
On the Master System version, unless you turn and look at the wall,
Mhm.
it won't show you that there's a secret as you're just traversing. You actually have to turn. And that's actually a nasty part in the very last dungeon in the game, which I'm going to skip for now. But there are secrets in the dungeons and the auto map.
So, and then I forget. You can save anywhere in the Master System one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's and then and it also had the manual and hints. Like it gave it told you what each of the weapons, what their value was, and who can use them, and all the items, what they're used for, which was very convenient as well in the Master System one. I mean, in the Switch one, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. What about the rest of you? Whoever played the Ages version, what'd you think?
Oh, the Ages version was night and day, because I started out the Master System, like I said, and not to say like, because I felt pressured that I had to try and get as far as I could within the month, and things get in the way, work and life and whatnot, and carrying around my laptop with emulator on it isn't exactly the easiest thing either. So but the reason why I switched, because I was sitting there, I was like, everyone tells me how much better the Ages version was. I mean, we had already touched about how everything is stupidly expensive for what you get from the enemy treasure chests, and your level experience takes for freaking ever. And I learned almost within, call it 20-25 minutes, how fast you can grind by comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Like monstrously faster.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can take 5 hours of grinding on the Master System and do it in probably like 90 minutes or less through the Ages version. And that's not to say that it's making the game easier. It's making it more accessible without having to spend that much time. As I mentioned, I think this game was released, like the way that it was designed originally is a product of its time, when people were expected to sit at home and figure this out. And, like I say, you got your money's worth, because you'd have to figure out these cryptic puzzles and whatnot that you otherwise you'd feel super accomplished when you actually did figure it out, because you didn't have any real outlet to tell you, with the exception of your friends and whatnot, or calling in your Sega line. But the Ages version made it infinitely easier in terms of accessibility. It didn't make it didn't like guide you any more so than any of the other versions. But your grinding is there, and then, like Melissa had mentioned, you get like a crib sheet of all the weapons, who can own those weapons, like a complete full-on list, and then also the whole leveling system. Who can unlock this spell here? You literally just knew just by going through, what was it, like 2 menu options on the Switch, and you got like the entire like basically novel of what this game had to offer and what you could do to reach those goals. And honestly, and then like I'm gonna rave about this too. The dungeon crawling was infinitely better with that too.
Mm-hmm.
This is coming from someone that, again, not massive into the whole RPG thing, but I had also never seen anything like this with the first-person view. But being able to see the dungeon on the left-hand side of the right-hand side of the screen, I'm like, okay, I have been here before. I can skip going this way. I actually noticed, without you guys even mentioning here, how some of the walls would have a slightly different texture on the map. I'm like, oh, I wonder what that is. Oh, that's a hidden passage. You can go actually through those bricks like it's a curtain.
Mhm.
It really made an interesting experience a whole lot better for someone that had never touched this before. I mean, full out, I don't know that I would have bothered giving this game as much attention had the Ages version not been accessible for myself to grab.
Yeah, so just one more thing to mention. You guys brought up, pretty much all the, good quality of life improvements. The last one is it's not available by default. You actually have to map a button on your controller to it, but the ability to fast forward. So there's a couple enemies that are particularly long with their battle animations, zombies and ghouls and slimes in particular.
Oh yeah.
That you can, hit that trigger button or wherever you map it to. That's where I mapped it to, but and fast forward.
You know about that?
No, I didn't. What I
Yeah.
I should also mention that when I was playing, Dean told me on stream that you can also walk faster. You can choose. There's a setting.
I did that too. That made things a lot nicer also.
Yes,
Yeah.
that made things a lot nicer too.
So
But I like that because the slime, it was like, ugh,
Yeah.
So-
And the ghouls and zombies.
So they didn't. So the Sega Ages version on Nintendo Switch maintains the sort of Master System graphics and sound, including the Japanese FM sound. But then it added all these quality of life improvements like
Mhm.
auto mapping and speed and all that kind of thing. So it's really a great way to play the game, right? It's really
is.
faithful to the U.S. version with
Yeah.
all these nice things added.
Yeah, and I think like for me too, like when I first played it, back in 2001, 2002, I had more time, right? We didn't have children, At that time I didn't have a job, and so I had more time. So playing the Master System version was doable. And now being able to play it on the Switch, on the go and, in a lot, faster time, that makes it a lot more enjoyable for me too. Yeah.
It's really it's really a great version, and I want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the ways that we can, or you can, or other people can play Phantasy Star. Of course, we talked about the Master System cartridge. We've talked about the Sega Ages version, which goes on sale on the eShop all the time. If you can, that's my recommended way to play it. I know there was a release of it. It's a unlockable on the Sonic's Ultimate Sega Genesis Collection, which was for Xbox 360 and PS3. And I'm going to just make a quick plug for the Sega Ages version for the PS2. If you have a way to do it, there's a fan translation on the PlayStation 2, which really is a graphical overhaul. They add a ton of story elements.
Yeah.
They added a ton of weapons and RPG elements like status effects, all kinds of things. Has anybody here, I guess Cody is probably the most likely, has played the Sega Ages version?
No, I haven't played it. I can tell you though, I was hyped for it because right around the time that I actually played Phantasy Star for the first time, I had read in a magazine that Conspiracy Entertainment, or whatever the studio was making the port of that to the US for the PS2. And I waited for years, and then finally they came out and basically said it was canceled.
Yeah.
They were gonna do the whole series.
Yeah.
From my understanding, like that.
I was really disappointed when I heard it was canceled. Yeah. Jeremy, did you say that you've played it?
No, I've never played it. That's something that's always somehow eluded me. I've only seen video and pictures of it, but it's something I really want to try out at some point.
Okay. But really, I think the Sega Ages version on the Nintendo Switch is one of the best ways to play Phantasy Star these days. I definitely highly recommend it. I'd like to now, I think what I'd like to do now is maybe go around and get people's final thoughts. And I'm going to ask everybody, Curtis does this, He does the 3 questions of doom.
Ooh,
And I don't remember all 3 of them, but I'm going to ask you the ones I do remember. I'm going to ask everyone, give us your final thoughts, and then rank the game out of 5. And Curtis doesn't accept half points. So integer 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 5.
We could accept half.
No,
points.
I want to do what Curtis does.
Okay.
So no half points. You got it. You got to stick to it. So we'll just go through this. Jeremy, what are your final thoughts on Phantasy Star? And then I'm going to ask you some questions of doom.
All right. So Phantasy Star, is of course, as I mentioned, a staple in my video game history. It's what got me into RPGs. To this day, RPGs are my preferred game to play. It all really started with my love for Phantasy Star. My dad and I played this side by side growing up. As we discovered new things, we would have separate save files, but as we discovered new things, one of us would save over the others, and effectively, we were playing on a single save file. And actually, something funny. Can I talk about the ending a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead. We skipped the ending. Yeah, go ahead.
So at the ending, you fight King Lassic, and if you click the buttons too fast, you miss that you're supposed to go somewhere else. So my dad got to the ending of that, beat Lassic, and missed that part, and deleted his game, so that I had to beat it myself. He's very proud of that. So he came up and told me after I got home from school, he goes, "Hey, I ended up beating Lassic, but you got to do it yourself. I deleted the game." So I said, "Okay." So played through it, beat Lassic, and then was reading through the text and said, "Hey, I don't think that's the end of the game."
Yeah.
And of course, as we know, it's not. There's one more boss after that. And the game tells you to go visit the governor.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
And then you encounter the final boss.
Yeah.
So that's a memory that always sticks out of my mind as something funny when I think about this game. But yeah, totally like a staple, like I said, in my library, and game I'll love forever.
Great. Yeah, I always had a friend. I'll comment on the ending real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend who used to say any good RPG has another final boss after the final boss. And Phantasy Star is like that too. All right. So Jeremy, I'm gonna ask you the questions of doom. So the first one I think is, should people play this game today?
Yes.
It's worth playing today. It's aged well and all that kind of stuff.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. And then we'll just keep it to 2, maybe. How would you rank this game out of 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Integers only.
5 out of 5.
5 out of 5. All right. Excellent. All right. Cody, how about you? Any final thoughts on Phantasy Star you want to mention?
It's just a great playthrough. If you want to sit back and play a game that's going to be reminiscent of what RPGs used to be, it's a great example of the grind, but I feel like it's more of a hardcore grind. So yeah, I mean, it's a good one to go back and play. And like me, like I said, couple playthroughs in my lifetime, and who knows when the next one will be. But I feel like it needs to be played to get the rest of this main cartridge series, and even into online. I mean, there's tie-ins from the first game that you would only get if you played it.
Is that right? Mm. Yeah, I want to talk about some of the other games in the series at the end. Okay, Cody, how would you rank this game? Or should somebody play this game today? Should we play the game today? Do you recommend people play the game today?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Definitely. And how would you rank it out of 5?
5 out of 5.
Okay. I'm gonna add a third question. I'll go back and get Jeremy's on this. What version should people play of Phantasy Star if they're going to play it today?
Okay. Sega Ages, Switch version, definitely.
Switch, Cody?
Yep.
Being that I've only played the 2 cartridge base, and actually the one that I played was the Mark III version that had a translation patch, and that translation patch had the options that the Switch one does. So I use 2x walk speed, 2x EXP, 2x gold, and I still put at least 20 hours into it. It was like 6 streams just to finish up the last few dungeons was 4 hours. So even with those settings, when you can even augment them even further, I mean, yeah, I mean, I would say play the Switch versions, or unless you know how to patch ROMs, don't play one with those quality of life, and you'll probably, if you want that quick experience, play the Switch one.
Okay, James, what do you think of Phantasy Star?
Well, I know that you have raved about it for many years that I've known you, and like this goes back countless years that I've known you, that you've actually touted about how much you enjoy this game. And I went into it open-minded because, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I didn't go in expecting to hate it, but I didn't go in expecting to love it. I went in open-minded thinking, well, I'll give it a decent chance, being that I'm not super huge into the genre. And I'm glad that I tried both versions that were accessible to me, the Master System, because you know me, I'm a purist. I like to play it as pure as I can.
Mm-hmm.
But I quickly found out that that's probably not always the best case when you can, as you guys are touting it as quality of life improvements. But the Switch version was honestly hands down, it turned a game that I went in speculative of my enjoyment, and it honestly was a lot more than I had expected. I will say that it was still, from a first-person playthrough perspective, incredibly cryptic. But again, that it's reminiscent of the time that it was put out. So I think that nature suits the title for when that was produced. But I surprisingly did enjoy it, and this is coming from someone that genuinely doesn't really give RPGs all that much of attention.
Okay. All right. So do you think people should play the game today? Has it
For
aged well?
first-time playthrough, I would 100% say yes, but please go with the Switch version.
Okay.
You will thank yourself later, unless you really, really have like a month off of work and you want to go the purist route. Yes, it's absolutely still worth a play. Go ahead and grab yourself a Master System card. But I do 100% recommend it. But depending on what you have to put into the game time-wise, the version that you choose can make or break your playing experience.
Okay. So now, as someone who is a first-time player and who is a self-professed not a big fan of RPGs, this is a really important question. I want you to rate the game, and don't let the fact that everybody else is rated at a 5 so far. We're looking for a really honest review here. What would you rank this game out of 5?
You know what? Full tilt. I am going to, because you won't allow integers, because grr.
Curtis, go ahead.
I think it's entirely fair giving it a 4.
4.
I personally think that I see why you guys did it for your side. You guys have the nostalgia for it. I
Yeah.
don't. But honestly, if it was most any other RPG that I would have tried, I would have probably not even bothered going more than a handful of hours through it. And this one I saw, honestly, really did surprise me in terms of enjoyment for what it was. And yeah, I think 4 is incredibly fair. Would I love to give it a 5? I would, but it's just a little bit too cryptic for my taste, for figuring out what you needed to do and having to rely going online. But again, if it was 30 plus years ago and I had nothing but time on my hands and just going to school, then I might have had a little bit more chance to kind of grind that out.
Excellent.
Mhm.
Excellent. Good. Yeah. Always interesting to hear the take of a first-time player. Melissa, you want to give us your last thoughts? And
Well, Phantasy Star is my first RPG. You always remember your first. So I still enjoyed it this time around. Probably enjoyed it more because it did take less time. And it, I like RPGs. I don't play a lot of them because they do take up a lot of time. I mean, you all know I'm still on Octopath, and that's been like 3 years, 4 years now, 5 years.
Yep.
I don't know. So, but I'm still loving that game, and I do only like turn-based RPGs, and this may be why, because this was my first one. It's turn-based. So I definitely love it. I say definitely, yeah, play it, and play it on Sega Ages Switch. The quality of life improvements makes it, some of those things that you dislike about RPGs, this overcomes it. So I definitely say that. And I'm going to give it a 5. I'm going to give it a 5.
You're giving it a 5 out of 5. And did you and which version did you recommend?
The Switch version.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And should people still play it today?
People should play it today. Play it on the Switch. It'll be a great, little RPG that you play. And it doesn't take a long time on the Switch. It really doesn't.
Yeah, because they sped up so much stuff. Okay. Well, now I want to ask. You want my opinion?
Yes. No. You gotta.
I have
Since you played
nostalgia.
3 different versions. You played this on 3 different systems.
Yeah. So I'll just cut to the chase. I mean, it wasn't my first RPG, but I didn't play it until about 1997. I really enjoy it. I enjoy the whole series. Whatever. I would probably, certainly as a Master System game, it's a 5 out of 5. We talked about graphics and sound and all that stuff. It is just head and shoulders above anything that was available at the time of its contemporaries. So it's definitely a 5 out of 5. And as far as which version I would recommend, because I have some nostalgia for it, I do recommend the Sega Ages version on Nintendo Switch because of the mapping and all that stuff, and because it stays true to the original. If you have the means, though, the PlayStation 2 Generations version is really good. It really fleshes out some of the story and adds some more modern RPG elements, which I found was really interesting. And do I recommend anybody play it today? Yes. As James has mentioned, it's a little bit older style RPG, but there is Google, there are walkthroughs, you can get through it, and it's a lot of fun to play, especially if you're into sort of the old style RPGs. So yeah, we all love the game.
Yeah.
So from there, I wanted to ask, where do people who have played Phantasy Star go from here? We've made an allusion to a number of the other games. Cody, you've played people who've played Phantasy Star 1, what do they do next? Any other games?
You got to go in order. Phantasy Star 2. My thoughts on it. You got to play the whole series and take the story in while you're doing it. Don't just rush the experience, because I know with like Phantasy Star 2, I played it more than once already in my lifetime, maybe 3-4 times. Phantasy Star 3, I've done a couple, in which I'm honestly kind of thinking about doing a run of them all again after playing that. And then Phantasy Star 4, I've done numerous amount of times, because I can tell you, like, one of the last times I played it, it really tied a lot of things in that I hadn't seen before. Like in the first game ties in, there's some things that tie into it. You got to play them. I mean, and even going into the online, Phantasy Star 3, concepts of Phantasy Star 3 and 2's story go right into online.
Phantasy Star Online, right?
Yep.
Okay, Jeremy, what about you? You have any thoughts about what players should do with Phantasy Star series?
Yeah, like Cody said, definitely play in order. So you play the first one, hit the second, third, fourth. The third is a little bit of an offshoot. It doesn't seem very obvious where it fits into the overall story until closer to the end of the game. But 4 does a nice job of tying them all together. And 4 really is like just, kind of the perfect culmination of the whole series, and just kind of, really sends the traditional RPG game series off really nicely. It's probably the one with the best fleshed out story. Although I think 3 is a game that had some good technical ideas that probably suffered from a shorter development time, and would probably do the best with some kind of remake or something like that. But
Mm.
and then two is a grind fest. So if you thought one was a grind fest, two is a grind fest.
I want to ask Jeremy, since you got, the full series experience, it seems pretty well memorized. I mean, it ties, people talk about three not tying. No, it so does, and that's why I'm saying you got to take the story in and not miss certain dialogues, because when you get to, each game, there's something ties, and four is just like you said, the ultimate culmination of all of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I'm hearing is both of you are recommending that people who liked Phantasy Star 1 should continue 2, 3, and 4 in order. Those are all three Sega Genesis. They're available on the Sega Genesis. And the various Genesis collections seem to always include 2, 3, and 4. So definitely give those a shot. And I will say number 4 is my personal favorite of the series. Always highly recommend that. But don't play 4 until you've played 2 and 3. Okay, so I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode of our Cartridge Club Game of the Month podcast. And we have the pleasure of announcing the upcoming games. For February, Cartridge Club is playing Elden Ring, which was voted Game of the Year, I think, in December. That's available on PlayStation 4, 5, and the Xbox One or Xbox Series consoles. I think it's on Steam too, yeah. And then in March, Curtis, who we've mentioned, is bringing us Mario Madness, where we will be jumping into the original Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3, which surprisingly I don't think the Cartridge Club has ever covered.
Wow.
And I'm looking forward to that because I've never played Super Mario Brothers or beat any of those games. So join us in March for Mario Madness with Curtis. And then finally, we have the honor of announcing the April Game of the Month, and that is going to be Tomb Raider. Now, there are a lot of Tomb Raider games. I don't know exactly which one we're covering.
I think it's OG.
The OG Tomb Raider.
Yeah.
And so stay tuned for some details about OG Tomb Raider.
And again, if you'd like to get involved with the club, I'd encourage you to follow us on Twitter at Cartridge Club NA. You can also visit our Discord for all kinds of discussion about past, present, and future games of the month. There's also the Cartridge Club forums at cartridgeclub.org and the Facebook community and group pages. To those of you interested in supporting the club beyond a review on the podcast app of your choice, I'd like to mention that the club is entirely funded by pledges made from other members of our community. We are extremely grateful to those supporters, and if you're interested in becoming one of them, please look into how you can do that at patreon.com/Cartridge Club. And we just want to thank all of you for being on. So, Jeremy, why don't you tell us where we can find you?
These days, just on Discord.
Yep.
Yep.
We see
in the
you
Cartridge
talking.
Club. Yeah, Cartridge Club Discord.
All right. And Cody, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at MasterCWelch, or my favorite place to hang out, Twitch, MasterCWelch.
And James, where can we find you?
I'm sporadic with work, unfortunately, in terms of content that I can put out, but I do frequent YouTube at RetroPixil, the same with Twitter and Twitch. I'm on all three. Again, I'm not super consistent with putting out content, but when I find time, I end up doing like 2 or 3 videos all at once, and then I'll go absent for a period of time, and then I'll dump down another 2 kind of thing. But in terms of Twitter, I try to keep on top of that every couple of days, and Twitch, as much as I would love to stream more, I don't, but you could throw a follow on there, and when I do go on, I generally prefer the older kind of arcadey style games, platformers, that kind of deal.
Cool. Very nice.
Okay.
All right. And I'm Mrs. QDawg. You can find me on Twitter or the Discords. Mrs. QDawg. That's DAWG.
Yeah, and I'm Mighty QDawg on Twitter. And we also have a YouTube channel called the Mighty QDawg channel that you can find us on. And of course, we are also active on the Cartridge Club Discord.
Then to everyone listening, we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you for joining us.
CC Unite.